This afternoon, the sheriff is going to cover some additional details on Monday's officer-involved shooting that led to the death of suspect George Smith. As I previously stated before, we've appreciated everybody's cooperation and patience as we ensure that details we release are factual and have been thoroughly investigated by our team. The sheriff will be addressing the facts that we have confirmed during this investigation. This will include the names of deputies involved, the rifle displayed by the suspect, and a more clear timeline of the events as they occurred. We will not be releasing the name of the witness who called 911 and was present at the time of the incident. Her information is exempt under FSS 119. I have copies of the initial report to provide to each of you, as well as information on the crisis intervention training that both deputies involved in the shooting completed in March of this year. I have hard copies here, which I believe I've provided, and I can also provide them electronically after. After the sheriff speaks, we can take questions, just with the understanding that the investigation is still open. With that, I'll bring up Sheriff
Good afternoon. First, I'd like to clarify something I said from my last press conference. I indicated that the event happened at 12 a.m. I meant 5:12 a.m. That's when we first got the 911 calls. We received about 3. One of the callers followed the individual, and he pulled into the McDonald's parking lot, where she conversed with him for a short time and relaying information to our communications operators, who in turn relayed the information to the deputies responding. The first deputy on scene was arrived at 5:15 a.m. That was Deputy Austin Oski. They began verbal communication with Mr. Smith, asking him to drop the gun. He did not do this. They continued verbal commands. At about 5:21, Corporal Derek Alexander approached with a shield team with a less lethal shotgun, and Mr. Smith at that point was holding the rifle downward, so he felt that he had an opportunity to use less lethal. He fired 3 shots from a distance of approximately 72 feet. We know that 2 of the rounds struck him. It turned him slightly, but then it did not phase or incapacitate him. He began to rotate back toward the shield team, raising the firearm up to take aim. Deputy Austin Oski, who was at a different angle at the back of the vehicle, the shield team was toward the front of the vehicle, he was at the back of the vehicle. He saw them coming up on aim for the other deputies, and he fired 4 rounds, striking Mr. Smith. 1 round went through his hand, and 3 rounds hit him in the back. The rifle was later identified as a .22 caliber rifle, not the original AK-47 that he claimed that he had. Although this is a .22 rifle, the firearm was loaded with 22 mag ammunition, and from that distance, those rounds could have easily penetrated the ballistic vests of deputies. The deputies on scene, all but 2 of them, were CIT trained. They did try to communicate with him to no avail. And as you heard from the 911 call that we released, he seemed to have it pretty much set in his mind what he wanted to do. At this time, investigators have not found any reason why he did this. A couple days prior, we were told by family members that he had been depressed and he had mentioned suicide. He had some medical ailments, just some injuries, and he couldn't do what he used to do. Follow-up interviews with those same family members, the story has somewhat changed. So right now, it is still an active investigation, but we don't have any known run-ins with law enforcement other than the civil call that I told you guys about earlier in the week. We don't know why he was here in Charlotte County, other than to potentially confront sheriff's deputies. With that said, I will open it up for questioning, but I want to remind you that this is still an open, active investigation. Once my investigators have completed their end of it, it will be submitted to the state attorney's office for a follow-up review. With that, I will open it up for questions.
I know the officers involved had a CIT training. Did any of them have any kind of disciplinary records that we know of?
Off the top of my head, I do not know.
Have they fired their weapons before while on duty?
Not that I'm aware of, no. Deputy Corporal Alexander, he's a longtime member of the Sheriff's Office. He started in February of 1998. He was also prior military, as was Deputy Oski. He started with our agency back in February of 2017, and he also is a former military member.
Talk a little bit about what goes into these investigations, you know, what kind of things you look at when because you do have a lot of information in this case.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts. Of course, you know, we talk to the witnesses, we pull 911 tape, there's a lot of forensics that go into it. We look at the projectiles, the distances. There's just a lot of moving parts in these investigations, and it takes time.
I know last week you said that a motive was not known, still not one known at this time.
No, the only thing we have right now is that he was potentially suicidal and he was looking for somebody to help him out with that. And unfortunately, he chose our agency.
You know, obviously mental health is a very big problem in every community across this country. Talk a little bit about some of the resources you can help with families if they know that a family member might put themselves in a situation like this.
Well, they can reach out to our local Charlotte Behavioral Health to get some information. We've also recently started our mental health unit where we've contracted and we have a mental health provider on staff here at the Sheriff's Office, which they're looking at individuals that we deal with on a regular basis out in the community. And we're trying to make sure that we connect those dots and make sure that they get the help they need so it doesn't escalate to something along these lines.
You also mentioned all but 2 officers that were on the scene that night had received this training. Is that a big push for this department?
Yes, it's a very big push. My goal is to have 100% of my law enforcement staff, my detention staff, and my communications operator CIT trained. And we're getting there.
Talk a little bit about what goes into that training.
Well, that's a 40-hour block of training. We partner with Charlotte Behavioral. They go in and they basically learn what that individual is going through. There's headsets and stuff that they put on to kind of better understand what they're feeling and what they're hearing. You know, lots of times, traditionally, as law enforcement, we'll go to a scene and we're giving commands out, and they don't necessarily listen to us. And it's not because they don't want to listen to us. It's often somebody who's going through a mental health crisis or any type of crisis. There's so much going on in their head that they just don't hear us. So this training also, when they're able to, when it's safe to do so, they can step back and they can try and make that communication. Things happened here so rapidly. They tried for a few minutes, but things just unraveled very quickly, and unfortunately, a man lost his life.
Is there anything more that you could share about Mr. Smith's background? I think the 911 call mentioned possibly a military background. Is that?
From what we found right now is we have no evidence that he was ever in the military. We have checked and we have found no records. Like I stated, we have no record of him with any law enforcement agency, so he's basically been completely off the radar. He's been living in DeSoto County, Arcadia, has no ties to Charlotte County that we're aware of.
How much longer do you anticipate the Sheriff's Office investigation to go on this?
Do you know how much?
The investigation, like the sheriff said, we're still following up on a lot of different angles. We're collecting video from the DeSoto County line into where the incident happened. So Corporal Hawkins has been doing that along with the other detectives. So it's hard to say with collecting video and forensics. A lot of it is how long it's going to take with the forensics to come back. It could be a few weeks, it could be a couple of months with getting forensic back from FDLE just to wrap everything up for us.
And then, as the sheriff said, it'll go to the state attorney's office.
Yes, and the sheriff said at initial press conference that we notified the state attorney immediately of the situation, and they had their investigators out within 45 minutes of me getting the call myself.
And then do the 2 deputies stay on leave until that is complete through the state attorney's office?
No, actually, Corporal Alexander is expected to return to duty tomorrow, since he only fired the less lethal. Deputy Alstonowski, we're going to kind of play it by ear. We may be bringing him back next week on modified duties. Basically, he'll be working in the office.
I know.
One of the things the reason we kind of do that is, you know, to keep them involved, to keep their head in the game, and we can keep an eye on them and make sure that they're mentally okay. Because you know, taking a life is not an easy thing to do, and it's not what we're. If we have to, we will do it, but it's not something we go looking to do, and it's very traumatic on everybody.
You mentioned, obviously, you have a relationship with Charlotte Behavioral Health. You now have a mental health team that goes out into the community. What kind of mental health resources do you have for these officers?
We have the initial, after a shooting, we have what's called a crisis intervention stress management debrief, where they sit down with some counselors and they just kind of go through a debrief. And then after that, we actually follow up with our psychologist. And he meets with them, sits down with them together and also on an individual basis to make sure that their mental health is okay, and they have done that. Okay, thank you very much.